Out of Order Gun Rights Podcast, Episode 63.
Welcome to the Out of Order Podcast, your window into the firearms community, exploring those shaping the future of our rights and protecting our lifestyle, laws, legal cases, activism, and self-defense in a candid and honest podcast for our brothers and sisters in arms. Here's your host, James Kalita.
Thanks for tuning in to episode 63 of the Out of Order Gun Rights Podcast. Today's sponsor is the Out of Order Gun Rights Podcast, so please head over to the show notes page, outoforderjameskalita.com/63, and you can consider becoming a Patreon supporter of the show. The Patreon supporters get exclusive access to our members-only Facebook group and a special thank you message on the show. So head over to Out of Order James Kalita. And today's guest is Zachary Fort. Zachary Fort is from the New Mexico Shooting Sports Association, a state affiliate of the NRA in New Mexico. And now, here's Zachary Fort.
Zachary Fort, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. So, Zachary, you are the president of the New Mexico Shooting Sports Association. Would you tell us a little about that?
Yeah, definitely. So, like you said, I'm the president of Mexico Shooting Sports Association. New Mexico Shooting Sports Association is the state affiliate of the NRA for New Mexico. So I don't know if you or all your listeners were aware of this. The NRA actually has affiliates in every single state. Now, we are a distinctly separate organization, so we are not the NRA, but we have, I guess you would say, like the charter, so to speak, for the state of New Mexico. Most of our members are NRA members as well.
Oh, okay, excellent. And so, how did you become involved with the organization?
So I guess a little bit of my background is actually kind of a little bit more in politics, and so kind of what I'm kind of going to talk a little bit today about is kind of the changing political landscape in New Mexico for gun owners. So for a long time, New Mexico has had, and still to this day, still has pretty good gun laws. But what's kind of happened recently through several different things that have gone on is that climate has threatened to change very quickly. So what New Mexico Shooting Sports Association for a long time didn't really have really much of a political presence. They did back in like the 70s and 80s, but then for a long time there really wasn't a political presence from the organization, and that needed to change, and some people affiliated with NMSSA approached me and said, hey, would you be interested in taking on a leadership role with the organization to kind of help build a political presence and a political awareness in the state of New Mexico of what's going on right now. So that's kind of how I became involved with NMSSA.
Oh, great. And so you mentioned the changing political climate. I mean, we have Trump as a president and control of both houses. What's going on in New Mexico? What's sort of prompting the change?
Yeah, so definitely glad you asked. And I think this is one of the big things I'm going to talk about a little bit later as well, is how much of the fight for the Second Amendment rights is actually at the state level, not the federal level right now. So a little background about New Mexico. New Mexico, while it's a very large state land-wise, has a pretty small population. We only have around 2 million people in the state, and about half of those people live in central New Mexico in the Albuquerque area, which is mostly in Bernalillo County. Now, voter registration-wise, Democrats heavily outnumber Republicans in New Mexico. It's actually about 2 to 1. For every one Republican, there's about 2 Democrats. So from kind of an outsider's perspective, it would appear that New Mexico could potentially be a very anti-gun state given those demographics. But what you'll find in New Mexico is we're probably one of the last places you're going to find pro-gun Democrats. I know several pro-gun Democrats. We have pro-gun Democrats who are elected across our state. So, but they're starting to become a dying breed of sorts, particularly as the progressives in New Mexico have kind of been emboldened in recent years with a bunch of primary victories to kind of go after some of the few remaining pro-gun Democrats in New Mexico. But, I mean, with that being said, there still are some that have great ties to their community, and I think they will keep getting elected. So then that kind of takes us up to what's happened in recent years. So based on the demographics of New Mexico, these outside gun control groups, mainly funded by Michael Bloomberg, kind of came in and said, we New Mexico, has a small population, TV time is really cheap, things like that. We're going to come in and we're basically going to try and ram our agenda through New Mexico to basically, claim a victory. And in 2016, they outspent the NRA in New Mexico by a factor of more than 10 to 1, with dumping all the money that they did into New Mexico. And they actually came up short. They failed to pass their agenda in the 2017 legislature right after the 2016 election. So that was a huge defeat for them, and I think it was a big victory for us, but at the same time, it was a very narrow defeat, and I think more people began to realize that gun owners in New Mexico, we can't just wait for the NRA to come in. We have to take responsibility for our rights ourselves and not just kind of sit back, so to speak. And that's kind of the first thing, is that based on the demographics of New Mexico, it's can become kind of a prime target for gun control groups. But the second thing is what we've seen is a huge spike in crime in New Mexico, and particularly in Albuquerque. For people from outside of New Mexico, one of the first things they hear about New Mexico, or what they might be familiar with, is the TV show Breaking Bad. Have you watched Breaking Bad before?
I saw the first episode and then kind of got bored and moved on. Yeah.
All right. Well, it's for people outside New Mexico, that's one of the first things. Like when you say you're from Albuquerque, people are like, oh, Breaking Bad. That's what they associate. And in kind of this very sad way, it's almost kind of fitting that Albuquerque is known for Breaking Bad, because so much of actually what's going on right now is actually dictated by the amount of drugs and crime we see in our city. And kind of where that more or less kind of comes from is there's basically been this revamp of the criminal justice system in New Mexico that kind of came down from the state Supreme Court and then down to the smaller court levels and district attorneys that people really didn't ask for and we didn't really need, so to speak. Well, for a long time, Albuquerque and New Mexico had higher than average crime rates nationally. Compared to similar cities like Tucson or El Paso, it was pretty similar for the region and demographics. So so through that, we've seen massive increases in crime in Albuquerque. Albuquerque is number one in the country for auto theft. I think it's number one in the country for property crime. And to give you an idea of just how bad auto theft is in Albuquerque, in a given year, approximately 1 in 50 cars is stolen in Albuquerque.
Wow, that is huge.
Like one in 50 cars in a given year is the approximate number of cars that are stolen in Albuquerque. But in addition to property crime and auto theft, we've also seen corresponding increases in things like carjackings, violent crime, and homicide. A few years ago, Albuquerque would see 30 to 40 homicides per year, which in an area of about 1 million people is a little bit, it's above national average, but it's similar for other cities of its size. I think this year in 2018, we're on track to see about 100. So you're looking at more than a 200% increase in homicide over the last several years.
So yeah, 100 homicides, or on schedule for 100 homicides, and that's, I would think that really be a push for the pro-gun side, but you're saying it's more of a push for the anti-gun side.
So the anti-gun side, which is much better funded than the pro-gun side right now, has really tried to capitalize on that and kind of push it for, we need more gun control. So even though several years ago we didn't have these issues and we didn't have these gun laws they're proposing, they're saying now they're trying to use that as justification. And there's a lot of people in Albuquerque who are worried about crime, and rightfully so. I mean, I think every poll I've seen come across that talks about the number one issue, not only for Albuquerque but for New Mexico overall, it's crime is number one. So it's trying to look for solutions to this. And as gun owners, we're saying, you know what, these gun control laws are not going to do anything. And you're going to pass these laws, nothing's going to happen. You're going to pass more laws, nothing's going to happen. And you're going to pass more laws. I mean, look what's happened in Illinois and Chicago. They keep passing law after law after law, and nothing's happening. It's only getting worse. The only reason they're not seeing as many homicides as they used to in Chicago is because the medical response has gotten better. That's the only reason. and things like gun control detection systems, where they basically put on like light poles and traffic signals, microphones that listen for gunfire. That's how bad it is. And actually, people are talking about doing that in Albuquerque now as well, putting on some kind of microphones that listen to gunfire. That way they can pinpoint it before someone calls 911. But then, so with that being said, that's one of the factors that's kind of leading in this push towards more gun control, is just this ridiculous out-of-control crime in Albuquerque. But there's two examples that I think the problem is not our gun control laws in New Mexico. The problem is I even have a hard time, it's just this utterly broken criminal justice system we have. There's two examples I want to bring up to just show how bad our criminal justice system in New Mexico has become. So earlier this year, there was a man who was a violent repeat criminal who attempted to run over a police officer with a vehicle. And he was actually shot in the arm in the process because the police officer drew his firearm and shot at the man who was attempting to run over him with the vehicle. Fortunately, I do not believe the police officer was badly injured in the incident. So he was arrested after that, and when he was facing up to it was about 30 years in jail in New Mexico for the crime, because that was the end of a crime spree that he had been on. And the prosecutor, the district attorney, gave him a plea deal that gave him less than a year in jail for that. Less than a year for a violent criminal attempting to kill a police officer. That was his punishment, less than a year. And a little bit of background on that. The district attorney for the Bernalillo County area is a man named Raul Torres. And for lack of a better term, he's just a pawn of George Soros. When he ran for district attorney in Bernalillo County, where Albuquerque is in 2016, George Soros personally set up a PAC to solely support him, put a whole bunch of money into it, and I think it was kind of this big money from people like George Soros is why he won. So George Soros bought this guy, sent him down here, and he's been a disaster. I mean, when you're talking about violent people, and apparently the reason Raul Torres said that he got such a good deal is because apparently he made some kind of promise that he was going to be good after this, even though he had a long criminal record. A second example, and I don't know when you're going to air this podcast, but when I think it was about a week ago, there was a man who was arrested by Albuquerque police, and he was in possession of 22 stolen firearms and several improvised explosive devices. He also had a long violent history. He had been previously arrested for actually assaulting a police officer. We're talking about a guy he's violent. He has a long criminal history. So he goes before a judge, and the judge is going to determine, are we going to set this guy free back into the community? I mean, it looks like he's probably stealing guns, selling them to other criminals, who are then killing people. And the judge says, well, actually, we're going to let this guy out on his own recognizance. No bail, nothing. Just arrested, sent back into the day community. Probably took less than 48 hours. And it's just this turnstile justice system. We prosecute, in fact, Raul Torres, I say we, in Bernalillo County, Raul Torres prosecutes less than half of all felony cases that come across his desk, less than half. So we have this criminal justice system that from the Supreme Court down is just an utter shambles. We have prosecutors who have no interest in putting violent people behind bars, and we have this rapidly escalating crime. And now these people like Raul Torres saying, actually, what's going to fix this is gun control. And they just seem so oblivious to what's going on. It's really sad because Albuquerque, as in so many ways over the last several years, you can see the change in the city business. It's hard to find a business now that doesn't have security cameras. At least many businesses, most parts of the city, have a lot of bars in their windows, things like that. It's just kind of sad what's happened to this city. But then, so I bring that in because that's one of the big reasons we see a push for gun control. Is people say, this is going to solve all these problems, even though there's actually very little empirical evidence that most of these gun control policies that are getting pushed actually change things after implemented. And I think that's there was a really good piece written by economist Thomas Sowell several years ago that talked about, what you would expect to see is a change after something's implemented. That's how you determine if it's good or not. It wouldn't be, so people often look at these very high level correlations. Well, these states have these laws, these states don't. But like, what actually happens after you implement the laws? Let's look at this from an econometric view. Like, do things change? And things really don't change. And if these gun laws that are getting pushed get implemented, we're not going to see change. So I know I talked a lot about from the defensive side, but that's kind of a lot of where we're at right now. There are definitely some positive things the Mexico Shooting Sports Association would like to see. In particular, I think there's some changes to the concealed carry laws we have in our state. You do need to have a permit to have a concealed carry firearm on your person. So I think there's definitely some positive changes. We could see some adjustments of things that really don't make sense. Like one that's always kind of bothered me is how you have to qualify with different calibers and the way they rank the calibers and things like that. Don't really make a whole lot of sense to me, that the way they do that. But yeah, so that's kind of a little bit of the landscape of where we're at right now in New Mexico.
And you mentioned earlier that the push for gun reform is at the state level rather than federal.
Mm-hmm.
Would you like to talk a little more about that?
Yeah, definitely. So New Mexico Shooting Sports Association, we're the NRA affiliate for New Mexico, but there's actually, I believe, an NRA affiliate in every single state. So for all your listeners, whether they're in New Mexico or in New Mexico, definitely come help us out, New Mexico Shooting Sports Association. We'll get you plugged in. But if you're outside New Mexico, I would really encourage you. Well, the stuff that goes on nationally is very important. In particular, right now, a lot of what's being done is that confirming federal justices who are pro-Second Amendment. That's one of the things that I see as being of huge critical importance. I know concealed carry reciprocity has been stalled in the Senate. I don't know what the path forward for it is, but confirming pro-Second Amendment federal justices is huge, and that's a lot of the fight I see at the federal level. And that's not to, and I don't want to downplay that at all. That's hugely important, especially confirming Judge Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court. That will be a big victory for Second Amendment supporters. But on the state level, that's where these gun control groups have realized that's where they can probably make a bigger impact right now, is at the state level. So we've seen most of, at least the push that I'm seeing, they know that they're not going to get anything through the United States House of Representatives. However, they can try and come into a state level and go find some moderate Republicans and maybe a swing state and offer them a whole bunch of campaign cash and say, hey, will you support these gun control measures? And I think we've seen that in Mexico. A couple of the more moderate Republicans in the past have taken money from gun control groups. And I think they're seeing that a lot of other states as well, that they see lower level officials as easier to buy off with their money, because, I mean, if the assumption that politicians support Second Amendment because the NRA gives them money is I think the NRA could give $0 to any of these people, and they would still have the exact same position. Like they're there because people care about the Second Amendment. But I think on the gun control side, you see a lot of people who don't want to take the risk until they get paid off, so to speak. A lot of the fight right now is at the state level. That's where these groups are claiming their victories right now, is at the state level. And for people who are in very pro-gun states, like somewhere like Texas, North Dakota, they may not be super worried about it. It's sad what's happened there, because these laws haven't really done much to stop the crime there.
Right. So what kind of things are you guys doing to help sort of stem the push for gun control down there?
So I think a lot of it, we've been meeting with different state representatives, state senators, organizing people to turn out. So in New Mexico, we have what is known as a preemption clause in our state constitution. So any gun laws, or pro-gun or anti-gun, has to come down from the state level. So with that said, there's some of the more liberal towns in New Mexico would love to put their own gun control laws in the books, but they can't, because the state preemption clause basically says counties and municipalities cannot regulate guns. But what they have done recently, in just the last several months, they've tried to pass resolutions calling on the state to push more gun control. I think a really good example of that was in Las Cruces in southern New Mexico, a town of about 100,000 people. The city council there, I think pretty much every person on that council right now is a self-identified progressive. Right after, in kind of the big push after April, or I think it was April and May, They said, we're going to pass this resolution, calls for all kinds of stuff, assault weapons bans, magazine bans, and the like. And we worked to try and help people. Like there was a huge turnout. I think we saw, it was well over 100 people showed up on Monday afternoon at like 2 p.m. or something to go say, even for non-binding resolution, mind you, say, we don't want this. And actually, even though this council was made up of all self-identified progressives, they said, we're going to table this right now. And they eventually passed a very watered-down version, which I wasn't necessarily surprised by, given that, like I said, they're all self-identified progressives. So right now it's doing a lot of organizing for people to get them to show up and talk to their state representatives about these issues.
And Zachary, I always ask my guests if there are any books they recommend that all gun owners should read. Any come to mind?
I think The War on Guns by John Arlott Jr. is a good one. He's a really solid guy. The attacks on his credibility as an academic are kind of laughable in some ways. It's like just because you say he's discredited doesn't mean, like, he publishes responses to everyone who's gone after all these studies that say, like, people try to go after his studies because he shows that gun control, these laws really don't work. So then he always publishes refutes to them through his group, Crime Prevention Research Center. He's a really solid guy. He knows his stuff. He has some pretty incredible academic credentials. No one really cared. No one seemed to try to discredit him when he was working at all these very liberal institutions. But as soon as he takes the pro-gun stance, people go after him. But yeah, John Arlott, War on Guns by John Arlott is a great book.
Oh, great. And where should people try and find New Mexico Shooting Sports Association online?
You can go to our website at nmssa.org, or you can find us on Facebook at just New Mexico Shooting Sports Association.
Oh, great. And thank you so much for being on the show. Any parting words for our listeners?
I would just encourage people to get involved at the state level for the fight for the Second Amendment. And the, kind of going hand in hand with that is we have to show up every time. We don't get to take breaks. One of the things I don't think people realize enough is that in 2016, gun owners showed up in very large numbers to vote, but they also did in 2014. That's the reason why we have a pro-Second Amendment majority. It's not a big majority, but we do have a pro-Second Amendment majority in the United States Senate. It's because gun owners showed up in 2014 as well as 2016, and we would not have put Neil Gorsuch on the Supreme Court had we not shown up in 2014. So showing up, you have to show up every single time for your rights, and also get involved at the state level. That's where so much don't ignore what's going on at the federal level. Stay involved, show up, vote, contact your congressmen, senators multiple times per week. But also get involved. Don't turn a blind eye, because too many times I talk to people who just are not aware of what's going on at the state level. You ask them the other day, you say, well, like they can't. States like New Jersey, Massachusetts, California, they have assault weapons bans at state levels. And if you don't want to live in a state where all of a sudden these weapons are banned, then you need to show up at your state level as well.
Absolutely. Well, I thank you again for being on the show, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks again for tuning in to episode 63 of the Out of Order Gun Rights Podcast. Please head over to the show notes page, outoforderjameskalita.com, and /63. You'll find links to the books Zach mentioned and to New Mexico Shooting Sports Association. And I wanted to remind you guys about GunStreamer, great video site for gun guys, gun people, gun politicians. You can head over there. You don't have to worry about anti-gun policies affecting your search results or affecting the videos that you can watch. So had a great interview with the founder of GunStreamer, so go back a few episodes, check that out, and head over to the website. Out of Order, James Kalita. We'll see you next time.